All right, welcome back. In this video, we're going to go over one of my favorite things that has been added to CSS. We're going to talk about Flexbox. Now, Flex, I'm going to call Flexbox Flex for short for the rest of the video. But Flex allows us to make dynamic content so much easier. And I'll show you a lot about what I mean here, but let's dive right in because this is going to be probably a little bit longer of a video just because I want to cover all of Flex, well, at least most of Flex in one video. So let's go ahead now and switch over here to my browser and my code and let's create a new file here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click here and we will create a new file. And let's call this flex.html. We can close down this. And then let's go ahead and create our HTML5 document here. Now, Flex is really awesome. And it took a long time for it to become, for enough browsers to support it. So it's been around for a while, but now it's to the point where the most popular or most used CSS library, which is Bootstrap, has switched over from using floats to create their columns to using Flex. So it's safe to use pretty much. I think it has like a 95 or 96% coverage of browsers that can utilize Flex. So let's go ahead now and link our style sheet, and let's call we have to link our styles /styles.css. Then what we're going to do is let's create a div, and I'm going to just give it a class of container. All right, so we have a div with a class of container here, and I'm going to create a div with a class of let's just do item, and I'm going to let's make 6 of those. Okay, so we have a div with a class of container and a div with a class of items inside of that div. Okay, so let's just inside of here, let's just go through and type one. Let's just do item 1, and let's just copy and paste this here so that we're not spending too much time typing. And so this should make it real easy for us to kind of see what's going on. And then inside of our browser, let's go ahead and go to our flex.html. And now you can see we have our items 1 through 6 here. So let's jump over to our style sheet now, and let's just go ahead and create a new section here, and I'm going to call this Flexbox, and I'll hit Control / here to make that a comment. I'm going to add a few extra stars here just to kind of separate the page. I don't know why I like doing that. I just kind of like it. You don't have to do that if you don't like it. All right, so remember we had a div called container. So let's go ahead and target that. And just for good measure, let's give this a border. And I want to give this a border of just a 1 pixel solid, and we'll just use a dark border here. And then what I'd like to do is give this some padding. So let's give 18 pixels of padding. And let's refresh. Okay, so now we can see our container here. The other thing I want to do is let's go ahead and do a minimum height of this. So let's do a min height of, let's try 500 pixels and see what that looks like. And we could, you know what, let's use our view height we learned about. So we can do view height, and remember this is going to be a percentage. So let's try 50 view height. So that gives us 50% here. Let's go a little higher. I'm going to do 65. I don't know why, but let's do 65. All right, so that gives us something to work with here. The other thing I want to do is let's go ahead and start styling up the items. So we had a class of just item. And what I want to do here is I'm going to set a set width and height on these. And I think what I'm going to do is put these at 250 pixels by 250 pixels. And let's give these a background color of, let's try and kind of a lighter gray. So let's try a, I don't know how well this will show up, but we can try it. Okay, yeah, that shows up pretty well. 250 is probably a little big. Let's take these down to 150, see what that looks like. And then let's go ahead and give these a border as well, because I want this to be real obvious what's happening here. We'll also give that a border of 333. Okay, so now what we'll do is we have these items, and let's say I wanted to make these columns. Okay, well, what's really cool with Flex is actually in our container, all I have to do is give this a display. Instead of block, which it currently is because it's a div, we can say Flex. And if I refresh now, you can see that all of these are columns in a single row. Now, remember we said we wanted these to be 150 by 150, and they're actually kind of overlapping each other right now. So let's take a look at this. You see that it's actually underneath, they're kind of overlapping because there's not enough room. So this, if I spread the browser out though, eventually there is enough room for them, and you can see that they're square. Now, if I wanted to add a little bit of space between all of those, I could use this gap here, and let's just say, well, we could use margin on the items themselves, or I could use gap here on the container, and I could say, let's put a gap of 12 pixels in between these. Okay, so now we have a gap of 12 pixels. And if I spread this out, you can see that these rows these little boxes, these items will stay 12 pixels apart from one another. Okay, and they would just make one row. Now, we may not want it to shrink these like this. So let's say these were images on our website. Maybe we're doing an image gallery, and I wanted these to be exactly 150 by 150. So what I would do there is we'd add another property to this container, and we would say flex wrap. And what this is going to do is allow this to use its full width, and it'll put as many on a row as it can, but it will wrap down to the next row here like this. And let's see. And as the browser or the screen grows, see it, all 6 of them fit here. But as this shrinks down, you'll see them start dropping down. As soon as there's not room for the next one, it goes ahead and moves down. So this is one way that you can make a responsive website very, very quickly with Flex. And you can see now I made it really small and only 2 fit. And so I got 3 rows of 2 columns now. So Flex is very, very, very powerful, and I end up using this a ton, and I use this a lot for making, responsive layouts because this works a lot better than Float. We don't have any weird issues going on. We don't have to do any sort of weird, clear fixes or anything like that. The other thing we can start doing is we can actually define how we want these things to line up here. And I want to show you one last thing. Well, not one last thing. We got a lot to cover, actually. So let me go ahead and in the container, we have the minimum height of 65 view heights, but we didn't set an actual height, so this can actually grow. So what if I wanted to make these, instead of I wanted to put them in rows, what if I wanted to put these in columns? Okay, Well, we could do that as well, and what we'd have to do there is we give this a property called flex direction, and we could say column. Now, this flex wrap, by default, the default value of that flex wrap, I forgot to mention this, is no wrap. So if it's no wrap, well, I just change this to the direction be column, but if it's no wrap, that means it can't go to the next line. But we just defined it as wrap, and now you can see that we set this up as columns, and we have 1 through 6 here in columns. Now, if I had a set height, so let's say instead of a min height, we had a set height on the container. Now, the flex direction is still row, but instead of it wrapping this way, it's column, so it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can kind of see how it's laid out. And if I had more height, then it becomes 2 columns of 3 rows. And then as it shrinks down, then now it doesn't even fit on the screen. But that you can do. The direction can be rows or columns, and by default it's row. So this property by default is row. So if you don't define it, it's row to begin with. So if you want it to be a column, you can set that to column. The other thing we can do that's kind of cool is we can do row reverse like this, and now you'll see that the rows start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it puts them backwards. Okay, we can also do column reverse, and now you can see that they're backwards: 3, 2, 1, 6, 5, 4. And if we had less room or more room, you can see 2, 1, 4, 3, 6, 5. Okay, so these things can be regular or they can be reversed. Now I'm going to put this back on row because I want to show you a few more things here. So this is the default behavior right here. And honestly, if I just get rid of this height here, refresh, you can see that now with this height being auto, that our gap of 12 pixels is consistent with the tops and the bottoms here. Now, we can do a few other things here. We can mess with the spacing here. So let's go ahead and let's do a property called justifyContent. Now by default, this is going to be, the value will be flex start. So that's what you're seeing now. It starts at the beginning and just kind of goes through to the end. You can also do a flex end. And when you do that, then it's still in the same order, but the way that it lines up, and it's trying to start at the end of the row. So let's go ahead and make this bigger here so you can see what happens. This is really good for like right aligning menu items and stuff like that. This property would be. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but it lines up at the end of the container. And if I put that at flex start, then it starts at the beginning of that container. Okay? So refresh here. We'll make this big, and you can see that it brings itself over here. Now what happens if I want to center these? Well, the flex content can be centered. So let's see what that does. I'll refresh here. And now you can see that these group themselves with our gap, so 12 pixels, and there's an equal amount of space on either side. And as it shrinks down, you can see that once it loses space, that one will be centered. And so you can kind of see how this is starting to stack with this property. It centers everything, so that might be nice for an image gallery. Something like that. So that's completely dynamic depending on what screen size you have that you're dealing with. Okay, so that's center. There's a few other really cool ones we can do. We can do one called, excuse me. Oh, by the way, if you can't tell, I shaved my beard off, and I figured we could see how long it gets by the time I finish recording this series. So I'm not going to shave again until we're done here. But anyways, let me show you the next justify content value we can use. We can use one called space between, and I end up using this one quite often. And space between is pretty cool because what it does, let me just spread this out here. Now space between, it'll kind of justify everything to where the first item is all the way to the left, the last item is all the way to the right, and then it uses an equal amount of space in between these. Okay, so that is space between, and also, you know, it's also dynamic. You can kind of see what the behavior of it is. So that is space between. Now we have another one called space around. And what that does is it creates, let's just go ahead and give us the most space here. What this does is this will create the same amount of gap on either side of these boxes. So this gap between these two will be twice as much as this one. Now this one looks a little weird because we do have the 18 pixels of padding, but this side is half the distance of this one. Okay, so it puts the even amount of space available on either side of these divs, okay? And there's one last one I want to show you, which is really similar to this one, but different, and that is space evenly. And what space evenly does is, is it tries to adjust for the gaps, and now these are there's the same amount of gap at the beginning and in between all of these. So you see that looks really nice. So that is space evenly. Okay. Now it's really important to know that this would be considered the main axis, the main direction, because we set the flex direction to row. So this justify content justifies the space along the main axis. The main axis right there. Okay. Now, what if we want to figure out? Well, let's see here. Let's do for the justify content, and I think I'm gonna go ahead and leave that as, you know what? Let's do space between. We'll leave it there. And then what I want to do is show you one more property we can do called align items. Now align items, the default here is also flex start. So if you're going to use flex start, you don't need to define this at all. But that is the default. And what that's going to do, let's see, I want to show you. For the time being, I'm going to go ahead and throw a few inline styles here just to overwrite what we have going with the height of these. So I'm going to give this a height of 100 pixels. And we're going to do a couple of these just to demonstrate what this is actually doing. Let me go down, oops. Let me go down here. This one we'll put at 75. Let's do one more. We'll put this one at 50 pixels. And if I refresh, we have all different heights now on these boxes instead of them being uniform. So let's go ahead and spread the page out and see what happens. So flex start is going to align these at the very top or the beginning of the flex along this axis here. So you can see that those are all lined up on the top, but the bottoms of these are all different. Well, let's go ahead and look at some different values that we can use here. So of course we have flex start, so we can also do flex end. And if I refresh now, you can see that these line up along the bottom. So the bottom of these now all align with one another. And the extra space is at the top if there needs to be. Okay, so then let's look at another way to do this, and that would be center. So if we have all different height boxes here, then what happens is these are actually centered along here. And this looks a little weird and wonky, but I end up using this quite often, especially if you have, like, say, a menu bar and you have an image over here and a button over here and then a bunch of menu links in between. It looks really nice to usually to center, to align the items center so that the logo and the text and everything like that all align in the center. The other one that we can do here, and this might be a little weird, but let's try it. The other one we can do is stretch. Yeah, so since we set a height on these, so the reason that this is a little goofy, stretch doesn't look like it works, but it does. It's because we have these the height of these set. If these were like just shrinking to fit whatever content's inside of them, the stretch would actually make them all the same height. So if you wanted a bunch of columns that had the same height, and they could grow with the content inside of them instead of being statically set like we did in our CSS. So here we statically set the height of all these to 150 pixels. But if we were doing like dynamic content in here, like a bunch of text with like articles or something, we can make them all the same height by using the stretch. So a line item stretch would do that. Okay, the other one that we can use, and I find myself using this one very little, but we could use one called baseline. And what baseline does is if you have a row of text in here and say the text is in all different spots, it will actually align the text together instead of, it doesn't look at the edges, it looks at the baseline of the text that's inside here. So one thing I can do to kind of demonstrate that is, let's go ahead and give, I'm going to make all these items actually flex as well. So each one of these is going to be flex, and I'm going to say we are going to align items center, and we're going to justify content center as well. And what that will do is center vertically and horizontally the text that's in here. And now you can see more about what baseline is doing. Baseline is taking the baseline of this text, which is the bottom of these texts, and lining all of those up. Okay, again, this might look pretty good for different buttons or things like that, but honestly, I find myself using this one a lot less. But it does, I mean, there are purposes for it. So you may find a reason to use baseline, but that's what baseline does, is it aligns the inside content up evenly, and it doesn't worry about the edges. Okay, so that is the align items. So I'm going to go ahead and align these center for now, and because it doesn't look like it changed because these are all centered, so it's pretty much doing the same thing as center. Let's see, what else can we work on? Okay, the other thing we can do is there's a property called AlignContent. Now AlignContent is going to be the opposite. It's the secondary axis. So right now we're row, and now I want to talk about how we can align these along the secondary axis. So if the primary axis is row, the secondary axis on this would be the column or the Y. So primary is X because we have this set to row, and the secondary here is the Y axis. So if I wanted to align the content on that, the default is flex start, and I'm just going to go now and get rid of these extra heights. I only put these on here to show you that last property. So let's make these all the same again by getting rid of the inline style there. Refresh. Okay. To demonstrate this one properly, what I'm going to do is bring back our height on our container, and let's set this to 75. Now this property we're going to look at right now is going to be the same as the justify content. We got the same options available to us, but it's going the secondary axis. It's along the secondary axis. So we could use flex start, and of course we can use flex end. So let's see what that does. Flex start, this is the start, and so everything's just up here. Flex end is going to put everything starting at the bottom. So this is our whole container here. So aligned content is aligning the internal content, like all of this. So we could do that, and we could actually even do center. And now this is centered within our container div. We can align the content. We can do space between. Now we're using space between right now for our justify content. So this goes here, and there's equal space here. The space between is going to put the space between the columns, or the rows rather. So as these pop down, it's going space between, okay? So there's space between, and of course we can use space around. So now these are real even. That looks nice like that. So it would be in the center because it's going to add all the space around it. Cool. All right, and then we have stretch. And I believe stretch may be the default on this. I'm not certain on that, but so let's go ahead and change the height of this a little bit. Well, again, because we are setting the height here, stretch is not going to work the way that I want it to. So just know that stretch will ultimately stretch the height of these to fill whatever space that it has available. So it's really no different than the stretch on this direction. Just these two are, remember, this is primary, this is secondary, and if you change the direction from row to column, those and let's put this one on flex end. Okay, so now you can see that this is controlling the secondary, which used to be the primary, because I just switched this. So this is over here now. Oops, grab the wrong one here. So as I go like that, so these are not always the X and these are not always the Y. These are based upon what value you have, if it's row. So now flex end is down here. You see what I'm saying? I know it's hard to teach because it's hard for me to put that into words, but basically, based upon what direction you're using for flex direction, you will use either justify content to go along the main axis. So if you're using row, the main axis will be X. If you're using column, the main axis is going to be Y. Now, align content is going to be the secondary axis. So in this case, we're using row. So the secondary axis is this way with the Y. So that's how you align these items like this, okay? You can also do what is called, we have a few options that we can do on the individual items on the inside. And the one that I'm going to show you, let's go ahead and look. Well, I'm going to show you two different ones, okay? Let's say I didn't want to set the width of these. So let's go ahead and just comment out the width on the items. And now what we have is this, and I'm going to go ahead and put this back to flex start. And so these are shrinking on the x-axis to fit their content. What I could do is I can use a property called grow. So we can use flex grow, and these will be 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever. And what happens is it grows to fit whatever space is available. So if I want these containers to fill up whatever space is available to them, we can use the flex grow property on the actual individual divs or items inside of here, and they will grow and even shrink below. Now, what I could do is, well, let's put back the width. So I want to show you something else here. So now the width of these are 150 pixels, but because they have flex grow, they will grow to fill the space that's available to them. So as this goes up, now we have 5 of these can fit on here, and the last one will grow to fill its entire space. Okay. One last thing I want to show you is, let's go and just set this item 3, and I'm going to put an inline style in this one, and we're going to do flex grow 4. And let's see what that does. Okay, so I made it pretty big here so you can see what's going on. These are all flex grow 1 because each item had a class of item and we put flex grow 1. So these will grow, but we put flex grow 4 on this item 3, and you can see that item 3 is bigger than the rest of the items. And what's happening here is this is saying, hey, grow to fit whatever space is available so that it fills up all of the space that's available to it. But since we used 1 on these and 4 on this is going to grow to be 4 times more space than these. Okay, because we used 1 of these, so these are equal. This is going to use 4 times as much space. We could use 2 on that as well. And if we did flex grow 2, it will use twice as much of the space instead of 4 times. So as it grows, you can see it is not twice the size of these, but the extra space is using twice as much. So that's how you can make these. And I know right now, like, we probably want all these to be the same, and if they were images maybe. But if you wanted to give more space to one of your divs than the others, then you could very well give it more space. So like this is a good example where there's not much extra space here. So, but this one is taking up twice as much of the extra space as this one. So this is flex grow 1. This is flex grow 2. And we, that is what the flex grow properties do. And if I refresh this, you can see that this is getting just a little bit of space, and this is getting 4 times the amount of extra space. So that is flex grow. That's a really useful property that you can use. If you wanted them all to be even, just give them all the same value. And if they're all even, it doesn't matter if they're 1, 2, 3, or 4. So the most common is just 1. And that means that they're all going to use the same amount of space available to them to fill it up. So you see how dynamic this is. So it wouldn't matter if we were looking at this on a mobile device or just a really big 1920 by 1080 screen. If we wanted to look the same where these filled up the available space, we could do that. Now, the opposite of flex grow is flex shrink, and you can define whether or not these shrink below the size that you set them as. Right now, since we're setting the width, they can't. But just wanted to point that out there. The way that we could actually test that is right here. We can put our flex wrap to no wrap. And now they are shrinking below the 100 150 pixels. So if I go down here now and I say flex shrink 0, now these break out of they break out because we're saying, hey, you can't allow these to wrap down to the next line, and they can't shrink. So the default behaviors, these can shrink, but now we have grow on, but we're saying do not shrink below the 150 pixels. So it doesn't know what to do, so then it starts to overflow its boundary here, but they don't shrink. And there's reasons why you'd want to do that as well. Okay, so if you want these to be exactly 150 pixels or bigger, but no smaller than 150, then you set the width to 150 pixels here on the items, and you tell it that it cannot shrink. So flex shrink would be 0. And if you don't want them to grow, you can put flex grow 0 as well. And now, which is the default behavior, these stay at exactly 150 pixels and they don't grow to fill the space in between them. And the space in between them is actually set by our justifyContent. And right now we're telling it space between. So you see how powerful this is. There's so many different options that we can use to to build out very dynamic content on our website very quick and very easily. And I know Flex will take a little bit of practice to understand what each one of these properties do, but I just wanted to show you how this works, and I'm going to show you a really cool way that you can practice Flex. Well, one, you can do what we just did and change all these values and see what happens, and practice those. I'm going to show you a really good way to learn it, and I'm going to show you a good way to practice it that's kind of fun. The other thing that I wanted to show is, let's get rid of this Flex wrap. We're going to set this back to wrap. And now you can see that these will break down to another row. And what we could do is we could, on just one of our items, let's say, or multiple items, but let's say this item 3. I'm going to give this an inline style here. And I'm going to tell it that I want to align self flex end. I may have screwed that up. Let me just double check that. Align self flex end. I'm not sure why this isn't working unless I have some sort of weird conflict going on here. But what I want to show you is how we can take just one of these. Whoops. Align self. Let's get rid of this AlignContent property here. There we go. All right, this is what I want to show you. So we're using align item center here, and let me just get rid of that and put this to flex start and refresh. And so by default, all of these items are using the align items and are using flex start. Okay. Now, this one item, because we set it here and it has higher specificity than the others, because we used an inline style, which has a specificity of 1000, if you remember, this is going to align itself at the end. So we can make this one different. So it just pulls it down here to the end. Now, we could do other things besides flex end. We could use center. So now this one's aligned center. Honestly, I don't really use this that often, but there are times when I do end up using this. But yeah, there's all kinds of things we can do. You can use stretch, center, baseline. I don't think stretch will work right now either because of our height and width that we have set up. So maybe I'll show you that too. So right now we have our width and height set on these. So right now I'm just going to go ahead and comment out the width and height. And we'll refresh this. And now if this is what I wanted to show you with stretch earlier, these items, they're shrinking, they're doing their natural behavior, and they're only as big as the content inside of them make them be. So in this case, we would probably want to do something like padding, and we'll give this some padding of like 12 pixels, okay? Just so there's a little bit of breathing room between the text and the borders. But this one here, because we put this align self to stretch, it goes all the way to the tops and bottoms here. So let me just demonstrate this a little bit more, and let's just put some more content in one of these. So you can see this grows to fit this stuff here. Let's turn back off on our width, but not our height. And now you can see what I was talking about, where these items here, this one's stretching to fill the whole length and it's not shrinking down. So if I set, let me just get rid of this inline style because I wasn't able to effectively show you the stretch properties earlier. So let me show you what that does. So if I set these align items here to stretch, this is how we can get columns to be the same height regardless of the content that's within them. Okay, so this stretches all the way from the top to the bottom. Now, if I get rid of the height on the container, now these are controlled basically by the content in the second one because we have stretch on. So it's more, let's just put even more stuff here. You can see that it grows because the content inside of it grows, and since the rest of these are set to stretch as well, these are all going to have the same height column. So this looks really good if you have if you have like some cards or something on the screen and you want them all to have the same look and appearance, you could do something like this with stretch. So stretch is very powerful as well. And it's important to note that this is per row. So you see that these shrink down because this is only in this row. So these are big and then these two are small like this. So it's completely dynamic. This is how you can easily make dynamic content, guys. So I hope you see how powerful Flex is. And if you only knew how hard this was before Flex, some of this stuff was insanely hard. Some of it could only be done with JavaScript. And things like that. It was really, really hard. So I'm really thankful for Flexbox and the guys at CSS going ahead and giving us this powerful ability to manipulate and control content on our website. So we're going to be using Flexbox quite a bit throughout the course, but I do want you guys to play with it, and I wanted to show you a few ways that you can learn this. There's a website called CSS Tricks, and they have an awesome tutorial, and I reference this all the time actually, because if I forget what a property does, I actually like this better than Mozilla's documentation. But you could go here and you can see visual representation of what each one of these properties do, and it shows you, and you can follow along with the code, and then you can see a visual representation of what's happening with each one of these properties. So use this video and this article to learn. Just read through this and you'll have a really good understanding of using Flexbox. The other thing you can use is there's actually a game you can play, and it is, I think, called Flex Froggy, maybe? Flexbox Froggy. So go to flexboxfroggy.com, and what's really cool about this is you play a game where you put these frogs on the lily pads by using code, and I'll just show you an example. They got 24 different levels here. So if I got to get this frog on this lily pad, then I can use a justifyContent flex end, and you can see that now it puts that frog on the lily pad. So this is a nice, cool little game that you can play. So now we want to put the green one on the green lily pad and the yellow one on the yellow lily pad. Well, now we're still using the justifyContent, but we can try center. And boom, we just passed that level. And so this allows you to kind of play a game where they will teach you each property as you go. So this one will be justifyContent, and this will help you really understand. Let's do space between and see if that works for this. Oh, I didn't make it. So this, instead of space between, let's try space around. And that did it. So space around, so you can kind of see how to line these up. Now this one will be justifyContent space around, or no, between rather, sorry. So you get to play this game, and there's 24 levels as you go, and it gets progressively harder. And then now look at this. So now we start talking about align items, because now, see, it says align items. We got to get these to the bottom. So instead of using justifyContent, we're going to use align items flex end, and that's going to put these down here. So I'm not going to show you all the levels or how to beat it, but go play this game. That along with reading this documentation and watching my video, and it will help you get a real good grasp on Flexbox and how to move content around on the page. And I just think this is so neat to play with. So I'm really thankful for these guys. Whoever built this, thank you. This is a great way to learn Flexbox. So you guys go play a game, read this, and watch this video and practice, because Flexbox, I promise you, it is going to be very useful in your tool belt of things you can do with CSS. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you see the power of Flexbox, and we'll see you guys in the next video. If I can find my thing here to stop the recording. Bye!